What's going on, everybody? Agent Jim Shorts coming at you here, and we are back. I know it's been a little bit since my last upload, and I apologize for all of you who have been eagerly awaiting this. But do not worry, Agent Jim Shorts is here to fulfill all of your Jim Shorts needs. Yes, I am the Mark Caleb Smith of YouTube, and I will fulfill all of your needs. But anyway, let's get into what we're talking about today. And that is the MCU and the life after Iron Man. We all saw the MCU. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you're at least somewhat familiar, if not totally familiar with all the movies. And I think I can say they're a pretty solid bunch. I know it's not the most complex form of cinema, and it's pretty serialized, but they're still a lot of fun. And as a comic book fan, I can say they're a pretty fair representation of the characters and the art form. So the one thing we have seen that was pretty compelling and way more interesting than some of the funny quips we've seen throughout the series is this arc of Iron Man. He starts as a billionaire asshole and eventually comes out selfless savior. And I mean, that was a pretty dramatic and really well-told arc, in my opinion, and it wrapped up the series really nicely. The first 3 phases of the Avengers series was fabulous. And I think there are a few areas where I could complain a little bit and have some minor gripes, but overall that's just nitpicks, and I think it was a really solid series as a whole. But that being said, I would assert that a lot of the success and just overall well-received nature of this whole series was predicated on the back of Robert Downey Jr.'s star power. He really legitimized the whole franchise all the way back in Iron Man 1, and he's really continued to carry the load all the way through Endgame. So I mean, if you haven't seen Endgame, what are you doing? That movie's been out forever, but he dies at the end of it, big spoilers. And we're really left to wonder right now, what's going to happen to the MCU? As I said, I think Robert Downey Jr. carried this franchise for a while, and now Chris Evans is also retiring from the series. You know, he passed the shield to Falcon, and we were really left without a bunch of our heavy hitters. And with that, I'm really not sure who the face of the MCU is anymore. I know we will see at least a cameo from Tony Stark in the new Black Widow prequel movie that's coming out, but after that, he's really no more. And speaking of the Black Widow movie, it's looking like that's going to be her swan song as well. And I mean, that means that the original squad were basically just left with, Thor, Hawkeye, and Hulk? So I don't really know what comes after Black Widow. And I mean, what should Phase 4 look like? Well, Far From Home did give you the impression that Spider-Man would be stepping into the shoes that Tony Stark left behind, which I think would be a pretty good idea, honestly. Like, he's the next natural successor to Tony Stark. We kind of saw that mentorship happen, and I think that makes sense to the story in the world of the MCU. But there is the legal dispute between Marvel and Sony to consider. And to give you the Cliff Notes version, if you missed all that, basically Sony owns Spider-Man, Marvel was just effectively renting him from Sony, and Sony basically was like, we're going to make our own universe now, screw you guys, we're not going to give you Spider-Man anymore. Eventually the two came to terms, and now Tom Holland's Spider-Man is now going to be in 2 more MCU movies at least. But it's only guaranteed for 2 more movies. Marvel doesn't have a guarantee that there'll be any movies after that. So I find it hard to believe that someone as logical and well-planned as Marvel is going to bet all of their eggs on Tom Holland's Spider-Man being here for the long haul. So I really think this limits Spider-Man's potential as becoming this new Tony Stark face of the franchise character. So I think we really have to ignore Spider-Man in this conversation because I just don't think Marvel's going to take that risk. And last we checked, Fat Thor's going off with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Hawkeye's hanging out on Disney Plus, and I don't know where the hell Hulk is, but he's all weird Doc Green now, and I just don't think he can carry a movie at this point, or at least I don't think people know how to do it. So I don't think any of these old-timers are going to be the new face. Now you might say, Agent Jim Shorts, there's a ton of new characters that can take over this role and become the new face of the franchise. The problem, though, is if you really look at, say, T'Challa, Star-Lord, Captain Marvel, Groot, whoever, they really just don't have the staying power that Tony Stark did. None of them command a presence and make you think, oh, that's the MCU. They're all kind of their own unique individual characters that make up the MCU. So I really don't see any of them having the screen presence to just be that face of the franchise. So what's all this mean? I see Marvel going one of 2 ways. One, I think they'll try to force an existing character to be this poster child. But as I said, I don't think that's going to work out. Or 2, they'll do what I hope they do, and they'll take a page out of the comics and do something that'll actually satisfy the viewers. They could stop relying on one character and instead start relying on a group of existing characters to collectively build this new narrative. For those of you who don't really read comics or, know much about the medium other than these movies, let me explain a little bit. I mean, comic books have a way of making every issue a team-up or something that just crosses all kinds of barriers and stories. And it really kind of looks like how Infinity Saga worked, where all the movies and books kind of link together. So instead of relying on Stark to legitimize these movies and kind of have him pop up in Spider-Man and all these other different cameos, let's have collaboration between the characters be the driving force of the MCU. But Agent Jim Shorts, you may say, that's essentially telling Marvel to do nothing about replacing Tony Stark. And yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. Instead of looking for a quick fix to bring in more people via some marketing gimmick or shock value, let's allow the new teams that have been set up and the old teams that also to grow and change in this post-Stark universe. Let the void of him be felt by all characters and overcome. We kind of already saw that in Far From Home, and I really enjoyed it. To back up my point a little bit, let's look at the comics for some reference. At the end of Civil War II, which for those of you who don't know was a big story arc that spanned months if not years of comics, Carol Danvers basically kills Tony Stark at the end. He's technically comatose, but yeah, Captain Marvel's is kind of a dick. That's kind of how it works. But anyway, it was a pretty decent story. Some people didn't love it, but I thought it was pretty fun, and it had some deep and conflicting payoffs. And it really left you with this satisfyingly unsettling feeling by the end of it, because the conflict was resolved, but it was still felt, Instead of using this story to try to take things in different directions and see what the Marvel Universe is going to be like without Tony Stark in the mix, Marvel chose to try to push Riri Williams as the new Iron Man, and she eventually went by the name Ironheart. Well, they were trying to recreate the lightning in a bottle that they got with Miles Morales coming in for Peter Parker and all that coolness, but instead they just failed miserably. The change was clearly seen as a marketing ploy for diversity's sake and not really the story's sake, and fans didn't really buy it. Instead, they eventually just brought things back to the status quo, and they really just wasted a bunch of comic time. My worry is the MCU could do something similar to this, and they'll try to take T'Challa or Captain Marvel or Star-Lord or whoever and shoehorn them into this face of the franchise role. I don't think I'll see them donning any Iron Man suits or anything, but I can see them trying to make them that type of character. When in reality, these characters all shine already, but they just don't shine that bright, and frankly, they don't need to. The MCU doesn't have to have an Iron Man. When the MCU launched with Iron Man 1, no one knew what to expect with this new movie franchise. Marvel needed a Tony Stark to draw these people into theaters and to get the asses in the seats. They needed to gain the trust of the moviegoers. And at this point, the MCU has all the trust it needs. They have a fabulous reputation and made a talking tree a cultural phenomenon. Marvel will be just fine in this post-Stark universe. I think Marvel needs to use this loss to explore new avenues and new situations. Bring in the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and the Eternals as they already are. I think this is a crossroads for the MCU, but I'm optimistic that they can get this right and continue with the greatest cinematic universe of all time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you thought it was really cool, maybe even consider subscribing and checking us out in the future for more videos on these fun topics. And also, I just want to give a shout out to all of my Fantreons, Matt, Pants Tent Feldman, Eric No Clip Ton Blizzard, Papa Andrew Mackin, Spenstar Donut, Adrian, Matt the Mormon Townsend, Ben Rys Friends, and Jake Slinkman's mom. Anyway, thanks for listening, and stay frosty, guys.